Last week, we did part 1.
Jadi minggu lalu kita bicarakan tentang bagian 1 untuk kitab Hakim-Hakim.
And the more I study the book of Judges, the more I realize Israel, this was a bad time for Israel.
Jadi semakin saya mempelajari kitab Hakim-Hakim, saya semakin sadari bahwa ini adalah masa yang buruk bagi umat Israel.
We learn that Judges is about God's power and man's weakness.
Jadi kita belajar juga bahwa kitab Hakim-Hakim tentang kuasa Tuhan dan kelemahan manusia.
And we learned about a few of the judges, and we ended on Gideon.
Dan kita belajar tentang beberapa hakim-hakim minggu lalu dan kita akhiri dengan cerita Gideon.
We ended. Is it recording? No.
It is.
It is? It is. Okay. So, Gideon, the story we ended with last week was Gideon's success against the enemy.
Jadi dan kita akhiri cerita minggu lalu juga tentang bagaimana Gideon akhirnya memenangkan banyak peperangan dan mendapat kemenangan.
But we talked about Gideon making this ephod.
Dan kita bicara tentang bagaimana Gideon terus membuat efod ini.
And Gideon went back to his hometown kind of famous, like celebrity.
Dan Gideon balik ke kampung halamannya menjadi seperti orang yang terkenal kayak selebriti.
And he married a bunch of wives.
Dan dia menikahi banyak cewek-cewek.
And he had a lot of children.
Dan dia banyak anak-anak, punya banyak anak.
In fact, he had over 70 children.
Bahkan dia punya lebih dari 70 anak.
You thought the Vincents was a lot with 6 children.
Mungkin kalian pikir keluarga Pak Brand udah banyak 6.
But we began to see the failure or the downfall of Gideon.
Tapi kita akhirnya juga melihat kejatuhan atau penurunan dari Gideon itu sendiri.
Gideon even marries a woman from Shechem who's not even an Israelite.
Jadi bahkan Gideon juga menikahi wanita yang dari Shechem dan mereka bahkan bukan orang Israel.
She's a Canaanite.
Dia adalah orang Kanaan.
And the son that he has with this woman, his name is Abimelech.
Jadi anak dari Gideon dan perempuan ini namanya adalah Abimelech.
And at the end of Gideon's life, he said he didn't want to be king, neither did he want his sons to be king.
Jadi kita tahu bahwa di akhir cerita dari Gideon kemarin bahwa Gideon gak mau jadi raja dan bahkan anak-anaknya juga tidak akan jadi raja.
But this Abimelech, he wants to be king.
Tapi Abimelech ini mau jadi raja.
So he talks to the people of Shechem and says, would you rather 70 sons rule over you or one from your own hometown to rule over you?
Jadi dia katakan kepada orang-orang Shechem itu, kalian mau 70 anak-anak ini menguasai berkuasa atas kamu atau cuma satu aja yang sebangsa sama kamu untuk menguasai kamu?
And they said, well, we want one of our own to rule over us.
Dan mereka bilang, kami mau bangsa dari kami dong.
So Abimelech hires a bunch of, I don't know if it translates, thugs, gangsters.
Jadi akhirnya Abimelech mencari orang-orang geng atau kelompok yang kekerasan untuk hal ini.
And he kills all 70 of his brothers on one stone.
Jadi dia benar-benar membunuh seluruh 70 saudaranya dengan satu batu aja.
The only son to survive is Jotham.
Jadi satu-satunya saudara yang bertahan hidup adalah Yotam.
And so Gideon's generations do not go well.
Jadi generasi Gideon tidaklah baik.
He went from being fearful to being famous.
Jadi Gideon berubah menjadi dari orang ketakutan menjadi orang yang sangat terkenal,
to suffering the loss of pretty much all his generations.
Dan pada akhirnya semua generasinya mengalami penderitaan dan kesulitan.
Abimelech, things do not go well for Abimelech.
Dan jadi kelihatannya untuk Abimelek hal tidak berjalan dengan baik.
He ends up fighting with the city of Shechem
Akhirnya dia bahkan berperang melawan kota Shechem
that he's supposed to be ruling over.
Yang tadinya harusnya dia berkuasa atasnya, jadi raja atas itu.
And they end up dropping this big stone on his head.
Dan akhirnya malah orang-orang ini melemparkan batu yang besar ke atas dia.
But it doesn't kill him.
Tapi tidak membuat dia terbunuh.
But he knows they're about to kill him, so he commits suicide.
Jadi karena dia tahu bahwa orang-orang akan terus mencoba membunuh dia, malah dia bunuh diri akhirnya.
So the second half of the book of Judges, we're going to see God's deliverers committing suicide.
Jadi akhirnya di separuh dari kitab hakim-hakim, orang-orang yang dipilih Tuhan menjadi penebus atau penyelamat, malah mereka membunuh diri mereka sendiri.
Then 3 more judges are mentioned after Gideon.
Jadi ada 3 hakim lagi yang disebutkan setelah Gideon juga.
Tola, Jair, and Jephthah.
Jadi ada Tola, Yair, dan Yeftah.
Yair. Interesting. So we're going to watch a video because they're going to explain Jephthah better than I can.
Jadi kita akan lihat video karena ini akan menjelaskan tentang Yeftah lebih baik daripada saya bisa menjelaskan.
There's 2 stories tonight. We will watch videos because they're both kind of R-rated. Graphic.
Jadi kita akan ada 2 cerita yang akan lihat melalui video.
A mature audience.
Jephthah the Gileadite was a mighty warrior. His father was Gilead. His mother was a prostitute. Gilead's wife also bore him sons, and when they were grown up, they drove Jephthah away. "You are not going to get any inheritance in our family," they said, "because you are the son of another woman." So Jephthah fled from his brothers and settled in the land of Tob, where a group of adventurers gathered around him and followed him. Some time later, when the Ammonites made war on Israel, the elders of Gilead went to get Jephthah from the land of Tob. "Come," they said, "be our commander so we can fight the Ammonites." Jephthah said to them, "Didn't you hate me and drive me from my father's house? Why do you come to me now when you're in trouble?" The elders of Gilead said to him, "Nevertheless, we are turning to you now. Come with us to fight the Ammonites, and you will be our head over all who live in Gilead." Jephthah answered, "Suppose you take me back to fight the Ammonites, and the Lord gives them to me. Will I really be your head?" The elders of Gilead replied, "The Lord is our witness. We will certainly do as you say." So Jephthah went with the elders of Gilead, and the people made him head and commander over them. And he repeated all his words before the Lord in Mizpah. Then Jephthah sent messengers to the Ammonite king with the question, "What do you have against us that you have attacked our country?" The king of the Ammonites answered Jephthah's messengers, "When Israel came up out of Egypt, they took away my land from the Arnon to the Jabbok, all the way to the Jordan. Now give it back peaceably." Jephthah sent back messengers to the Ammonite king saying, "This is what Jephthah says. Israel did not take the land of Moab or the land of the Ammonites. But when they came up out of Egypt, Israel went through the desert to the Red Sea and on to Kadesh. Then Israel sent messengers to the king of Edom saying, 'Give us permission to go through your country.' But the king of Edom would not listen. They sent also to the king of Moab, and he refused. So Israel stayed at Kadesh. Next they traveled through the desert, skirted the lands of Edom and Moab, passed along the eastern side of the country of Moab, and camped on the other side of the Arnon. They did not enter the territory of Moab, for the Arnon was its border. Then Israel sent messengers to Sihon, king of the Amorites, who ruled in Heshbon, and said to him, 'Let us pass through your country to our own place.' Sihon, however, did not trust Israel to pass through his territory. He mustered all his men and encamped at Jahaz and fought with Israel. Then the Lord, the God of Israel, gave Sihon and all his men into Israel's hands, and they defeated them. Israel took over all the land of the Amorites who lived in that country, capturing all of it, from the Arnon to the Jabbok, and from the desert to the Jordan. Now since the Lord, the God of Israel, has driven the Amorites out before his people Israel, what right have you to take it over? Will you not take what your God Chemosh gives you? Likewise, whatever the Lord our God has given us, we will possess. Are you better than Balak, son of Zippor, king of Moab? Did he ever quarrel with Israel or fight with them? For 300 years Israel occupied Heshbon, Aroer, the surrounding settlements, and all the towns along the Arnon. Why didn't you retake them during that time? I have not wronged you, but you are doing me wrong by waging war against me. Let the Lord, the judge, decide the dispute this day between the Israelites and the Ammonites. The king of Ammon, however, paid no attention to the message Jephthah sent him. Then the Spirit of the Lord came upon Jephthah. He crossed Gilead and Manasseh, passed through Mizpah of Gilead, and from there he advanced against the Ammonites. And Jephthah made a vow to the Lord, if you give the Ammonites into my hands, whatever comes out of the door of my house to meet me when I return in triumph from the Ammonites will be the Lord's, and I will sacrifice it as a burnt offering. Then Jephthah went over to fight the Ammonites, and the Lord gave them into his hands. He devastated 20 towns from Aroer to the vicinity of Minnith, as far as Abel-Keram. Thus Israel subdued Ammon. When Jephthah returned to his home in Mizpah, who should come out to meet him but his daughter, dancing to the sound of tambourines? She was an only child. Except for her he had neither son nor daughter. When he saw her, he tore his clothes and cried, "Oh, my daughter, you have made me miserable and wretched because I have made a vow to the Lord that I cannot break." "My father," she replied, "you have given your word to the Lord. Do to me just as you promised, now that the Lord has avenged you of your enemies, the Ammonites. But grant me this one request," she said. "Give me 2 months to roam the hills and weep with my friends, because I will never marry." "You may go," he said. And he let her go for 2 months. She and the girls went into the hills and wept because she would never marry. After the 2 months, she returned to her father, and he did to her as he had vowed, and she was a virgin. From this comes the Israelite custom that each year the young women of Israel go out for 4 days to commemorate the daughter of Jephthah the Gileadite.
I think that's the. No, I think it's the plug. The plug, because we're doing optic. The converter might be going on. All right. So the story we just heard was about Jephthah.
Jadi cerita yang barusan kita lihat adalah tentang Yeftah.
He made a very stupid vow.
Jadi dia membuat sebuah janji yang sangat bodoh.
I don't know what he was expecting to come out of his house.
Saya nggak tahu apa yang diharapkan keluar dari rumahnya.
But there's a few issues with this story.
Dan ada beberapa masalah tentang cerita ini.
First of all, I don't know any priest who would accept his sacrifice.
Pertama-tama bahwa saya nggak tahu kalau ada nggak imam yang akan terima persembahannya.
Only the priests are allowed to make sacrifice.
Karena hanya imam yang boleh membuat persembahan.
You bring your sacrifice to the priest.
Jadi kita bawa persembahan itu ke imam.
I don't know what altar he would sacrifice his daughter on.
Saya nggak tahu mesbah apa dan di mana yang dia bisa korbankan anaknya di situ.
Because it would make the altar forever unclean.
Karena itu akan membuat altarnya atau mesbah itu selamanya tidak kudus.
But Jephthah has victory, but he makes some really poor choices at home.
Jadi Yeftah memiliki kemenangan, tetapi dia membuat sebuah keputusan yang bodoh di rumahnya sendiri.
And so Jephthah's still not a story that we can be excited about.
Dan Yeftah masih menjadi cerita yang kita tidak bisa senang mendengarnya.
He's definitely not a good role model.
Dia benar-benar bukanlah sebuah contoh yang baik.
The only reasonable person in the story is the daughter.
Jadi di dalam cerita ini yang paling bermakna itu adalah anaknya.
She was willing to honor God.
Karena anaknya ini mau banget untuk menghormati Tuhan.
But then we get into the next judge, Samson.
Dan akhirnya kita lanjut kepada hakim yang berikutnya adalah Simson.
Samson is probably one of the most popular Bible stories.
Jadi Simson adalah juga saya rasa adalah yang paling terkenal, cerita Alkitab yang paling terkenal.
My view of Samson is not very high or good.
Jadi sudut pandang saya tentang Simson tidaklah terlalu tinggi atau baik.
And so I'm going to present this story through how I see Samson in his life.
Jadi saya akan menjelaskan ceritanya dengan bagaimana seperti sudut pandang saya, bagaimana melihat kehidupan Simson itu.
Samson suffered from the only child syndrome.
Jadi Simson itu bertumbuh di dalam anak tunggal sindrom anak tunggal.
He's the only child and he pretty much gets everything he wants.
Dia satu-satunya anak, jadi dia mungkin dapat segala sesuatu yang dia mau.
There's no competition.
Nggak ada kompetisi di situ.
He's not aware of anyone else but himself.
Dia nggak bahkan sadari orang lain di sekitarnya, cuma dirinya aja.
And I believe even his parents had him when they were already kind of older.
Jadi saya percaya juga orang tuanya itu melahirkan Simson waktu orang tuanya sedikit agak tua.
Because Manoah and his wife could not have children.
Karena Manoah dan istrinya tidak bisa punya anak pada waktu itu.
And then one day the angel of the Lord appeared to Manoah's wife.
Dan suatu ketika ada malaikat itu menunjukkan dirinya kepada istri dari Manoah itu.
And told her that she would have a son.
Dan mengatakan bahwa kamu akan punya anak.
And then she told her husband about it.
Dan dia kasih tahu suaminya tentang hal ini.
And then later on, this angel of the Lord reappeared to Manoah's wife.
Dan berikutnya lagi akhirnya ini malaikat ini menunjukkan dirinya lagi.
She's like, wait here, let me go get my husband.
Dan akhirnya si istri ini katakan tunggu dulu, saya akan ambil suami.
And then the angel of the Lord began to give Manoah and his wife instructions about this special child.
Jadi terus akhirnya si malaikat ini memberikan sedikit arahan tentang anak yang spesial ini.
That this young child would be a Nazarite from birth.
Jadi di mana anak ini akan jadi Nazarin dari lahir.
A Nazarite is someone, it just means someone who is separated for special purpose for God.
Jadi Nazarin itu hanyalah seseorang yang dikuduskan atau disendirikan untuk sesuatu tujuan yang khusus dari Tuhan.
It's a vow someone makes, and the rules for it is in Numbers chapter 6.
Jadi ini adalah tentang janji atau sumpah yang dikatakan atau nazar yang dikatakan seseorang, dan ada di kitab Ulangan 6 1-21, nanti bisa dipelajari masing-masing.
The Nazarite vow is voluntary.
Jadi nazar dari seorang Nazarin ini itu biasanya secara sukarela.
But there are 3 famous people who from birth were chosen to be Nazarite.
Ada 3 orang yang terkenal yang dari sejak lahir sudah terpilih menjadi orang yang membawa nazar ini.
Samson,
Ada Simson,
Samuel,
Samuel,
and John the Baptist.
dan Yohanes Pembaptis.
Did you guys know they were all Nazarite?
Apakah teman-teman tahu kalau mereka semua Nazarin?
During the vow, you cannot drink any wine or eat anything from a grape, anggur.
Jadi selama sumpah itu ada, janji itu ada, mereka nggak boleh minum satupun anggur dan tidak boleh makan apapun yang ada anggurnya.
You cannot cut your hair during the vow,
Kamu nggak bisa potong rambutmu
and you cannot touch a dead body.
dan nggak boleh nyentuh orang mati.
Well, the story continues with Samson falls in love with a foreigner.
Dan ceritanya berlanjut kepada waktu Simpson akhirnya dia jatuh cinta kepada orang asing.
She just happens to be a Philistine,
Dan wanita ini adalah orang Filistin
which is Israel's enemy.
yang adalah musuh dari Israel sendiri.
And he's supposed to be delivering Israel from the Philistines.
Dan dia seharusnya menjadi orang yang membebaskan Israel dari Filistin.
And on his way to the engagement,
Jadi di perjalanan waktu dia mau pertunangan itu,
so that they can fill out the ketubah, the kupa.
ya. Jadi akhirnya mereka bisa mengisi janji mereka atau ketubah itu,
He comes across this lion.
dan dia melewati singa ini.
So I don't believe Samson was a very big man.
Jadi saya nggak percaya kalau Simpson itu orangnya gede.
If he was big like Hercules, then they would have known where his strength comes from.
Jadi kalau dia besar kayak Hercules, orang pasti bisa mengenali kekuatannya dari mana.
I believe he was just a normal man.
Saya percaya bahwa dia hanya orang yang biasa aja penampilannya.
But he would receive supernatural strength when the Spirit of God would come upon him.
Tapi dia akan menerima kekuatan yang rohani supranatural waktu roh Tuhan ada di dalam dia.
But every drawing of Samson is this really big guy.
Tapi semua gambar dari Simpson selalu ini cowok yang besar,
Looks like Arnold Schwarzenegger.
kayak Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yeah, y'all might not know who that is.
Ada yang tahu siapa itu?
I'm getting
Terminator.
old. An actor?
Terminator.
Oh, Terminator.
The movie.
Big, strong.
Jadi besar, kuat.
When he gets to his wedding party,
Waktu dia sampai ke tempat pernikahan,
he's presented with 30 friends.
akhirnya dia dikunjungi sama 30-an teman-teman.
I think that's right. And something about Samson, he just decides he's going to tell a riddle.
Jadi kita nggak tahu tentang Simpson, dia cuma mau kasih sesuatu yang ceritain.
I don't think he was taking the moment serious.
Saya nggak tahu kalau dia mau benar-benar ngambil kesempatan itu jadi sesuatu yang serius.
Maybe he's a joker.
Mungkin dia adalah orang yang suka bercanda.
But he tells everyone, if you can solve this riddle, I will buy you all new clothes. But if you can't solve the riddle, you have to buy me.
Jadi dia bilang kalau kamu bisa jawab teka-teki ini, aku akan belikan baju. Kalau enggak, kamu harus belikan aku baju.
And the riddle goes, out of the eater something to eat, out of the strong something sweet.
Dan ini teka-tekinya bahwa dari mana makanan keluar makanan. Dari yang mana makan keluar makanan, dari yang kuat keluar manisan.
And at first it seems like there's no way anyone will ever guess this.
Dan untuk pertama kali kita begini, siapa yang bisa benar-benar jawab ini ya?
How are they supposed to know that out of a lion came honey?
Ya, siapa yang kira-kira bisa tahu kalau dari sebuah singa akan keluar madu?
But he shares the riddle with them anyway.
Tapi dia bagi gini, teka-teki ini aja, lelucon ini aja.
And they have no idea what it means.
Dan mereka semua nggak tahu apa artinya.
So they go to his now betrothed wife.
Jadi sekarang akhirnya mereka pergi ke yang istrinya ini.
And they tell her, if you don't tell us the answer to the riddle, we're going to burn you and your father.
Jadi kasih tahu ke wanita ini, kalau kalian nggak kasih tahu arti dari teka-teki ini, kami akan bunuh bapamu dan bakar rumahmu.
So she goes back to Samson and she cries and says, you must really hate me. You haven't told me the riddle.
Jadi akhirnya wanita ini datang ke Simpson mungkin nangis dan merengek untuk ngomong, kamu nggak kasih tahu aku apa artinya dari kata begini.
This part of the story is here because we begin to see one of Samson's weaknesses.
Jadi ini bagian dari cerita ini karena kita akan mulai lihat salah satu kelemahan dari Simpson.
I do not believe Samson should be marrying a Philistine.
Saya nggak percaya kalau Simpson seharusnya menikahi Filistin.
I know you're going to say, oh, but the scripture says it was of the Lord.
Jadi, kalau firman Tuhan katakan, tergantung kepada Tuhan.
I actually believe the scripture says the confrontation between the Philistines and Samson was of the Lord.
Jadi, saya percaya bahwa perlawanan antara Simpson dan Filistin inilah yang kehendak Tuhan itu.
God is looking for opportunity for there to be conflict.
Jadi Tuhan sedang melihat supaya di mana konflik itu bisa terjadi.
And Samson's cravings, he saw a beautiful Philistine.
Tapi bagaimana kehausan si Simpson ini melihat Filistin yang cantik.
But things don't go so well.
Tapi sesuatu tidak berjalan dengan baik di sini.
Because his wife tells his marriage party the answer to his riddle.
Jadi tetapi hal ini tidak berjalan baik karena si wanita ini akhirnya memberitahukan jawaban dari teka-teki itu di saat pesta pernikahan mereka.
I actually think the riddle is a prophecy over his entire ministry.
Bahkan saya rasa bahwa teka-teki ini adalah nubuatan tentang seluruh pelayanan si Simpson ini.
And so they say, oh, what is the strongest thing? It must be a lion. And what is the sweetest thing? It must be honey.
Jadi mereka berpikir, apa yang sangat terkuat mungkin singa dan yang paling manis adalah madu.
So Samson loses his bed.
Dan akhirnya Simpson kehilangan bagian dia.
So Samson must have been a gambling man.
Simpson pasti orang yang suka berjudi mungkin.
And he lost that bet.
Dan akhirnya dia kalah di putaran itu.
So he goes out to, I think, Escalon and kills 30 Philistines and takes their clothes.
Jadi akhirnya dia pergi ke Eskalon dan membunuh 30 orang Filistin dan ambil seluruh bajunya.
I'm going to show you a pattern of Samson's behavior.
Jadi saya mau tunjukkan ke Bapak Ibu Saudara sebuah pola dari sikap si Simpson ini.
He's supposed to be killing the Philistines to give Israel their freedom.
Jadi dia seharusnya membunuh Filistin untuk memberi kebebasan kepada Israel.
But the first 30 he kills, he just needs their clothes because he lost the bet.
Jadi kalau tapi pertama yang dia bunuh 30 orang pertama yang dia bunuh karena dia kalah aja dan teka-teki itu dan dia mau ngambil baju mereka.
So we're going to find out if Samson is about selfish revenge or Israel's deliverance.
Dan kita lihat bahwa kita akan temukan nanti tentang apakah Simpson ini tentang balas dendam untuk kepentingan sendiri atau untuk pembebasan Israel.
When he comes back to get his wife,
Waktu dia balik lagi untuk mendapati istrinya,
he finds out that her father gave her to one of the men that was at the wedding.
jadi dia temukan bahwa bapak dari istri itu ngasih wanita ini ke pria lain yang ada di pernikahan itu.
And this really upsets Samson.
Dan itu membuat Simpson marah.
You don't give his stuff to someone else.
Dia gak bisa dikasih barangnya, dia gak boleh dikasihin ke orang lain.
Samson's acting like a 4-year-old.
Jadi Simpson lagi bersikap seperti anak umur 4 tahun.
So he goes out and catches many of these foxes.
Jadi akhirnya dia keluar, akhirnya dia nangkap semua fox ini, rubah ini dan sekitar 300-an.
He ties their tails together and puts some coal or some fire.
Jadi dia ikatkan ekornya dan taruh api atau bara di ekor mereka.
He's looking for revenge.
Jadi dia coba untuk balas dendam.
and burns all the people's fields.
dan akhirnya membakar seluruh ladang orang-orang di situ.
The people find out and they're very upset.
Dan orang-orang akhirnya lihat hal itu dan mereka semua marah.
Let's look at Judges chapter 15 verses 6 through 7.
Lihat di Hakim-Hakim 15 ayat 6 sampai 7. Berkatalah orang Filistin, siapakah yang melakukan ini? Orang menjawab, Simson, menantu orang Timna itu, sebab orang itu telah mengambil istri Simson dan memberikan kepada kawannya. Kemudian pergilah orang Filistin ke sana dan membakar perempuan itu beserta ayahnya. Lalu berkatalah Simson kepada mereka, jika kamu berbuat demikian, sesungguhnya aku takkan berhenti sebelum ia membalaskannya kepada kamu.
So she ends up getting burned anyway.
Akhirnya istri ini akhirnya dibakar juga.
And Samson says, I won't stop until I get my revenge.
Dan Simson katakan, aku nggak akan berhenti sampai pembalasanku selesai.
Well, Samson's not supposed to be getting revenge. He's supposed to be delivering Israel from the Philistines.
Lihat bahwa seharusnya Simson tidak balas dendam, dia seharusnya membebaskan Israel dari Filistin.
And so far, he's only used his supernatural power for himself.
Dan sejauh ini bahwa dia hanya pakai kekuatan supranatural dia untuk dirinya sendiri.
Even when the Israelites hear of this,
Bahkan waktu bangsa Israel mendengar tentang hal ini,
they go to Samson
mereka ke Simson
and they say, we're going to tie you up and bring you to the Philistines.
dan mereka katakan, kami akan ikat kamu dan bawa kamu ke orang-orang Filistin.
You've brought nothing but trouble on Israel.
Kamu tidak menghasilkan apa-apa tapi hanya masalah aja ke Israel.
And Samson says, okay, tie me up.
Dan Simson katakan, ya ikat aja aku.
And so they tie him up.
Akhirnya diikat dia.
And they bring Samson to the Philistines.
Jadi terus mereka bawa Simson ke Filistin.
And all of a sudden he breaks, the power of God comes on him and he breaks the ropes.
Dan tiba-tiba kuasa Tuhan turun atasnya dan dia benar-benar melepaskan seluruh ikatan itu.
And he kills 1,000 Philistines.
Dan dia akhirnya membunuh ribuan Filistin.
He's getting his revenge.
Dia benar-benar menyatakan pembalasannya.
He takes the jawbone of a donkey and he kills 1,000 Philistines.
Dan dia pakai tulang rahang dari lembu, keledai, dan membunuh seluruh Filistin.
In this picture he's got lots of ponytails.
Di gambar ini dia banyak banget kuncir ya. Kunci rambutnya.
But we begin to see more of Samson's weaknesses.
Dan kita akan lihat lebih lagi kelemahan-kelemahan si Simson ini.
He goes down into the city of Gaza.
Akhirnya dia lari ke daerah Gaza.
And he meets kupu-kupu malam.
Terus dia ketemu dengan kupu-kupu malam.
Come on, Samson.
She needed money
Ya,
and he had some.
jadi wanita ini butuh uang dan Simson punya sedikit.
But what we learn is that Samson, he's strong enough to beat the external enemy, but he's weak against the internal enemy.
Dan kita lihat bahwa si Simson ini kuat sekali untuk menghajar seluruh musuh di luaran dirinya, tetapi yang di dalam dia tidak pernah bisa kalahkan.
Samson actually lives a life of whatever he wants to do, that's what he does.
Jadi Simson menghidupi kehidupan di mana apapun yang dia pengen hidupi, ya itulah yang dia lakukan. Gitu. Apa kepinginannya itu yang dia lakukan.
Whatever he desires, that's what he goes and gets.
Apa yang dia rindukan atau pingini, itulah yang dia pergi dan ambil dan dapatkan.
And so far we see some of his weaknesses is women and gambling.
Dan kita lihat sampai saat ini adalah kelemahannya adalah perempuan dan judi atau ya perjudian.
He has no strength against the internal enemy.
Dia tidak punya kekuatan sama sekali untuk melawan musuh di dalam dirinya.
they find out that he's with this kupu-kupu malam.
Ya, mereka temukan bahwa si Simpson ini sama si kupu-kupu itu.
So they plan on in the morning attacking him and killing him.
Jadi mereka merencanakan untuk di malam hari mereka menyerang dan membunuh Simpson.
Well, that night he gets up and he goes to the city gates. He breaks them off and carries them up a mountain.
Jadi dia tahu hal itu dan akhirnya dia ambil seluruh gerbang di kota itu dan dia pikul sampai atas bukit.
I guess he's just showing off to everyone his strength.
Jadi saya rasa bahwa dia hanya coba menunjukkan ke semua orang kekuatan dia.
He took their gates and carried them a long way.
Jadi dia ambil gerbang itu dan membawa itu sampai jauh.
And we all know the story of Samson and Delilah.
Dan kita semua pasti tahu cerita tentang Simpson dan Delilah, betul? Semua tahu?
But did you know that Delilah is not his wife?
Kayak apakah teman-teman tahu kalau Delilah itu nggak istrinya?
It's just some woman he's with.
Jadi ini cumalah wanita yang ya bersama dia aja.
And the same thing happens.
Dan hal yang sama terjadi.
The Philistines want to know where his strength comes from.
Jadi Filistin benar-benar mau tahu kekuatannya ini dari mana.
And he plays around and says some silly things.
Jadi ya dia selalu ngomong sesuatu dan dia mempermainkan dan ngomongin hal yang lucu aja.
But he's gonna gamble one too many times.
Dan dia selalu mencoba untuk berjudi di dalam beberapa hal.
And he finally reveals to her where his power is.
Jadi pada akhirnya dia menunjukkan apa kekuatan itu. Dari mana kekuatan itu?
It's actually not in his hair.
Sebenarnya kekuatan itu tidak ada di rambutnya.
It wasn't his hair that made him strong.
Jadi bukan rambutnya yang membuat dia kuat.
It's what the hair represented.
Dan apa yang digambarkan oleh rambut itulah yang membuat dia kuat.
You see, he was a Nazarite.
Lihat bahwa dia orang Nazarin atau orang-orang Nazar.
He was supposed to be separated, special to the Lord.
Jadi dia harusnya menjadi orang yang dikhususkan bagi Tuhan.
And that was represented visually by his hair.
Jadi itu digambarkan secara nyata yang terlihat adalah dengan rambutnya.
And Samson's life is a picture of how all Israel is at that time.
Jadi cerita Simpson adalah bagaimana gambaran tentang keadaan seluruh Israel pada waktu itu.
The hair represents a person's covering.
Jadi rambut itu adalah gambaran tentang tudung dari seseorang.
And it says that for a woman, she should have her head covered.
Di mana dikatakan di Alkitab kalau yang wanita harus punya rambutnya ditutup.
And this is displayed when a woman has long hair.
Itu digambarkan tentang seorang wanita punya rambut yang panjang.
And Paul says in the scriptures, it's even shameful for a woman to shave her head.
Itulah juga dikatakan oleh Paulus, itu memalukan kalau seorang wanita bahkan mencukur rambutnya.
Because she's supposed to be under an authority.
Karena itu menunjukkan kalau si wanita harus ada di bawah otoritas.
Well, Israel was also supposed to have their head covered.
Ya, Israel memang juga seharusnya ada ditudungi rambutnya,
What does
kepalanya.
the hair represent for Israel?
Apakah gambaran rambut itu bagi Israel?
I'll help you.
Saya akan tolong teman-teman semua.
It was the law, the commandments of God.
Itu adalah Taurat tentang perintah Tuhan.
Their strength comes from obeying the commandments of God.
Kekuatan mereka datang dari bagaimana mereka taat akan hukum Tuhan.
But Israel allowed all of their neighbors to cut all of their hair off by them losing their commandments.
Jadi, tapi bangsa Israel biarkan orang-orang di sekitar mereka memotong rambut mereka dengan cara akhirnya mereka kehilangan perintah Tuhan.
Which left them weak against the Philistines.
Yang membuat mereka lemah melawan orang Filistin.
So, Delilah cuts off all of the locks of his hair, his dreadlocks.
Jadi akhirnya si Delila memotong seluruh kepang-kepangan rambutnya si Simpson ini.
And while he's asleep,
Jadi waktu dia tidur,
Judges chapter 16, let's read verses 20 and 21.
Hakim-Hakim 16 ayat 20 sampai 21. Lalu berserulah perempuan itu, orang Filistin menyergap engkau Simpson, maka terjagalah ia dari tidurnya serta katanya, seperti yang sudah-sudah aku akan bebas dan akan meronta lepas, tetapi tidaklah diketahuinya bahwa Tuhan telah meninggalkan dia. Orang Filistin itu menangkap dia, mencungkil kedua matanya dan membawanya ke Gaza. Di situ ia dibelenggu dengan 2 rantai tembaga dan pekerjaannya di penjara ialah menggiling.
So Samson thought, I will get out of this like I have done so many times.
Jadi pikiran si Simpson bahwa aku akan bebas dari hal ini, membebaskan diri kayak sebelum-sebelumnya.
But what he doesn't realize is there's going to be some permanent consequences to this time.
Tapi yang tidak disadari oleh dia bahwa pada kali ini akan ada konsekuensi bagi dia.
He's just going to shake off all the Philistines.
Ya, kira akan menggoncangkan seluruh Filistin itu.
He hadn't even recognized that God has left him.
Bahkan saking dia pede, dia enggak nyadari kalau Tuhan sudah meninggalkan dia.
So when he goes to break the ropes,
Jadi waktu dia coba lepaskan tali itu,
they won't break.
itu akhirnya tidak terlepas.
I can only imagine panic came over him.
Saya bisa bayangkan kalau dia mulai panik.
Because they drove pegs into his eyes to blind him.
Karena mereka menusuk matanya benar-benar untuk membutakan dia.
You see, he's never had real consequences yet in his life.
Lihat bahwa sepanjang perjalanan sebelumnya belum ada konsekuensi nyata yang terjadi dalam hidupnya.
Now they're permanent.
Nah sekarang ini mata ini, ini permanen, konsekuensi yang permanen.
He's not going to get his eyes back.
Dan dia tidak akan mendapatkan matanya lagi.
And he became a prisoner.
Dan bahkan dia menjadi seorang tawanan atau di penjara.
And they put him to work in the mill.
Dan akhirnya dia harus kerja menggiling.
You know, once you go blind, once they drive a stake in your eyes, there's no amount of prayer that's going to really help you.
Waktu benar-benar ada satu tongkat yang untuk mencungkil matamu, nggak ada doa yang bisa benar-benar menolong kamu di sini.
This is a consequence of his poor decisions in life.
Ini adalah konsekuensi dari keputusan yang sangat bodoh tolol di kehidupan dia.
But often there should have been great consequences, but he was able to get out of them.
Dan sering sebelumnya harusnya banyak konsekuensi, tetapi akhirnya dia bisa keluar dari hal itu.
But this time, there's no getting out.
Tapi kali ini tidak bisa keluar.
Now he's blind, a prisoner, and he
Sekarang
has
dia
to.
buta, menjadi tawanan.
And God's champion has now become a Philistine slave.
Dan sekarang bahwa panglimanya Tuhan menjadi budak bagi Filistin.
This is a grinding mill, and that was his new job.
Ini adalah gilingan itu, ini kerjaan dia yang baru sekarang.
He used to be a superhero, but now he works at the grinding mill.
Jadi tadinya dia menjadi seorang pahlawan, tetapi sekarang menjadi budak gilingan.
And the pay is not very good.
Dan bayarannya nggak terlalu baik.
One day, they were celebrating Dagon, their god.
Jadi suatu saat mereka merayakan tentang Tuhan mereka Dagon.
And they said, hey, bring out Samson, let him perform for us.
Dan mereka katakan, ayo keluarkan Simpson dan biarlah dia benar-benar perform buat kita.
I don't know, maybe Samson could dance really good. I don't know.
Saya nggak tahu dia perform apa. Mungkin Simpson bisa nari waktu itu.
They made him act like a fool so they could laugh at him.
Jadi mereka biarin Simpson bertindak kayak orang bodoh sehingga mereka bisa menertawainya.
He became something that entertained them.
Jadi akhirnya bahkan Simpson menjadi sesuatu yang dapat menghibur mereka.
And Samson is humiliated.
Dan Simpson dipermalukan benar-benar waktu itu.
But he's not changed much.
Tapi dia nggak banyak berubah.
You think losing your eyes would change you?
Ya kita kira bahwa kehilangan mata mungkin akan merubah dia.
You would think that him being a prisoner would change him.
Kita pikir kalau dia di penjara dia akan berubah.
But he asked to be placed between the two pillars of the building.
Tapi dia minta untuk dia ditaruh di antara dua tiang di gedung itu.
And he says, "Sovereign Lord, remember me, please, God, strengthen me just one more time, and let me with one blow get revenge on the Philistines."
Dan dia katakan, "Ya Tuhan, ingatlah kiranya kepadaku dan buatlah aku kuat sekali ini saja ya Tuhan, supaya dengan satu pembalasan juga aku balas kedua mataku itu kepada orang Filistin."
Samson's life is still about himself.
Lihat bahwa kehidupan Simpson masih aja untuk dirinya saja.
He just wants revenge.
Dia hanya mau balas dendam.
It means he could care less about Israel.
Artinya dia benar-benar nggak peduli terhadap Israel.
He only wants revenge for them taking his eyes out.
Dia cuma mau membalas karena mereka ngambil matanya.
And in a final act, he says, "Let me die with the Philistines."
Tapi di dalam aksi dia yang terakhir artinya dan dia katakan biarlah aku mati bersama Filistin.
Just like the young lion,
Seperti si singa yang muda itu,
the strongest of all beasts,
di mana bahkan dia benar-benar terkuat dari semua ciptaan.
it lays there dead, but something sweet comes out.
Jadi akhirnya mati di situ dan sesuatu yang manis itu keluar.
So here's God's champion, the lion, and only in his death can he do something but for value.
Jadi akhirnya dan di sini sekarang singanya Tuhan, yaitu pemenangnya Tuhan tadi, akhirnya dia mati dan akhirnya keluar sesuatu dari dirinya yang bisa bernilai.
I'm missing a 4 there. Out of the eater, something to eat. Out of the strong, something sweet.
Dari yang makan keluar makanan dan yang kuat keluar manisan.
When the honey came out of the strong, what was the condition of the strong?
Waktu yang kuat itu keluar sesuatu madu itu, kira-kira kondisi yang kuat itu apa?
What was the condition of the lion when the honey came out?
Kondisi seperti apa si singa itu waktu madunya keluar atau darahnya keluar?
It was dead.
Mati,
It was no longer strong.
tidak lagi kuat.
And so Samson is no longer the champion anymore.
Dan akhirnya Simpson tidak lagi menjadi si pemenang itu lagi.
The only value he has left is to take his life and as many Philistines as he can to revenge himself.
Jadi ya kesempatan yang dia miliki satu-satunya lagi bahwa dia harus membunuh sebanyak mungkin orang Filistin bersama-sama dengan nyawanya bersamaan.
He never cried out, "Lord, I'm sorry I failed you and I didn't deliver Israel."
Dia tidak pernah berseru kepada Tuhan dan bilang, "Tuhan ampuni aku tidak membebaskan bangsa Israel."
All he's thinking is, "I want revenge."
Seluruh yang ada di pikiran dia adalah aku mau balas dendam.
Like I said, I told you, he's suffering from only child syndrome.
Lihat bahwa dia benar-benar bergumul keluar dari sindrom anak tunggal itu.
He doesn't think of anyone else but himself.
Dia tidak berpikir terhadap orang lain, hanya dirinya saja.
And he has a tragic end.
Dan bahkan akhirnya ada sebuah akhir yang begitu tragis.
Now he does kill more Philistines in this one act than all before.
Ya memang waktu di kejadian terakhir ini dia membunuh Filistin lebih dari pembunuhan yang sebelumnya.
But all we know of is 1,030 Philistines that he killed.
Tapi yang saya tahu 1.100 Filistin yang dia bunuh.
He was supposed to completely wipe them out of the nation.
Dia seharusnya membunuh seluruhnya, menghabiskan Filistin dari semua bangsa Israel.
And he failed.
Tapi dia gagal.
In fact, the Philistines don't get defeated until King David.
Bahkan faktanya Filistin benar-benar tidak terkalahkan sampai ada Raja Daud.
You remember a few weeks ago when we told you the tribe of Dan couldn't beat the enemy, so they went up to a city?
Ingat bahwa waktu beberapa minggu lalu kita cerita bahwa suku Dan akhirnya tidak bisa mengalahkan musuhnya. Akhirnya mereka mengambil sebuah area yang berbeda di bagian utara.
I think we learned that at the end of the book of Joshua.
Saya rasa kita belajar tentang hal itu di akhir dari kitab Yosua.
Well, this is the story of how that happened.
Jadi ini cerita tentang bagaimana itu terjadi.
Samson is a Danite. He's from the tribe of Dan.
Jadi Simpson dari suku Dan.
And he fails to take the land from the
Dan
Philistines.
akhirnya dia gagal untuk mengambil area atau tanah itu dari Filistin.
And Judges 17 is this very strange story
Dan di Hakim-Hakim 17 ini ada sebuah cerita yang aneh.
about this guy named Micah.
Jadi tentang pria namanya Mika.
And the story starts off with his mother cursing someone for stealing her silver.
Jadi ceritanya dimulai dengan si ibunya mengutuk seseorang karena mencuri perak.
And Micah says, "Oh, Mom, that was me. I stole your silver."
Dan Mika katakan, "Oh, Ma, aku yang nyuri tadi."
He said, "But I'll return it to you."
Ya, aku nanti balikin.
And then his mom has some idea to make a silver idol.
Dan akhirnya si ibu itu punya ide untuk buat sebuah patung berhala untuk dari perak.
And something that keeps being said over and over during the book of Judges is found in Judges 17:6.
Jadi sesuatu yang terus diomongkan beberapa kali di kitab Hakim-Hakim ini seperti yang ditemukan di Hakim-Hakim 17 ayat 6 ini. Pada zaman itu tidak ada raja di antara orang Israel, setiap orang berbuat apa yang benar menurut pandangannya sendiri.
So no one was ruling over Israel. Everyone did what they thought was right.
Jadi tidak ada yang menguasai atau memimpin bangsa Israel dan semua orang melakukan apa yang benar di matanya sendiri.
All of Israel was this way.
Semua orang Israel pada waktu itu di seluruh Israel seperti ini.
The story of Samson, he did what was right in his eyes.
Jadi cerita tentang Simpson, dia hanya melakukan apa yang dia rasa dia benar.
So this guy Micah makes his own gods.
Jadi si cowok Mika ini akhirnya dia buat Tuhannya sendiri.
To him it seemed the right thing to do.
Jadi bagi dia ini sesuatu yang benar untuk dilakukan.
But then he finds this Levite and he says, "Hey, you come be my priest. I have this God to worship."
Dan akhirnya dia ketemu salah satu orang Lewi dan ngomong bahwa, kamu jadi imam untuk Tuhanku ya, untuk menyembah melayani Tuhan yang ini.
Micah tells him, "I'll give you 10 shekels of silver and a shirt and some food."
Jadi Mika katakan, aku kasih 10 keping dan juga baju untuk hal ini.
The Levite says, "Hey, that sounds like a good deal. I got a new job."
Dan akhirnya si orang Lewi ini benar-benar menerima, oh ini kayaknya deal yang oke, dan akhirnya kayak terima dapat pekerjaan yang baru.
Then there's some issues with the tribe of Dan flees to the north.
Dan terus ada masalah tentang suku Dan ini yang akhirnya lari ke utara.
And these people find out that Micah has his own priest and his own God.
Dan akhirnya mereka lihat bahwa Mika ini punya imamnya sendiri dan Tuhannya sendiri.
And they want to go take over this city, and so they're like, "Hey, we need a priest and we need a God to help us."
Dan akhirnya mereka mencoba untuk mengambil alih sebuah kota, dan dia bilang, aku perlu Tuhan dan perlu imam untuk di sini.
So this group of men say, "How about you come work for us?"
Dan kelompok masyarakat ini katakan, gimana kalau kamu kerja untuk kami?
And he's like, "Okay, that sounds great."
Ya, mereka bahkan menerima dan katakan, itu terdengar baik.
He was working for one man, now he's going to be the priest of a whole city.
Dan tadinya si orang Lewi ini benar-benar cuma jadi imam untuk satu orang Mika, tapi sekarang jadi imam untuk seluruh kota.
He became like the first mega pastor.
Dia jadi satu mungkin pendeta mega atau pendeta besar pertama. Belum pernah ada.
It's a very strange story in the book of Judges.
Ini benar-benar cerita yang sangat aneh di buku atau kitab Hakim-Hakim pada waktu itu.
It just shows you that Israel was doing what they thought was right.
Jadi ini hanya menunjukkan kepada kita bahwa Israel hanya melakukan apa yang mereka pikir ini benar untuk dilakukan.
Very much like many Christians today, they do what seems right.
Jadi ya apa ya mirip sama kekristenan hari-hari ini bahwa mereka melakukan apa yang mereka pikir itu benar saja.
So there's two last stories that I'm gonna let you see a video about.
Jadi dua cerita lagi yang mungkin kamu akan lihat video.
It's about a man who has a concubine.
Jadi ini tentang seorang pria yang punya banyak selir.
Some scholars think maybe he was just he married a Canaanite, and so they called her a concubine instead of a wife.
Jadi ada ahli Alkitab yang juga mengatakan juga bahwa karena ini wanita Kanaan, artinya si pria ini menikah ke wanita Kanaan, sehingga wanita ini disebut selir.
But the story is so messed up.
Tapi ceritanya sangat-sangat parah, berantakan.
It's I'm gonna let you watch it because it's really messed up.
Jadi teman-teman bisa langsung tonton aja karena ini luar biasa berantakan.
This video contains distressing subject matter. You want to know one of the most messed up stories in the Bible? It's Judges 19. A man's wife, or concubine, leaves him, so he chases after her to get her back. On their travels, they are confronted by a violent mob, and the husband gives up his concubine to the mob. They have their way with her all night, leaving her half dead. And when it's all over, the husband comes out and cuts her body into 12 pieces and sends them around the country. That's messed up. This Bible story gets a lot of criticism for the way that women are treated, and particularly how the husband treats his concubine. But there's something very unique about this particular story that's incredibly rare in the Old Testament. So stick around to find out what that is. But first, what exactly are you and I supposed to learn from a story like this? For starters, the main character seems to get away with his wicked act, leaving critics to wonder if God condones such violence. Let's take a closer look. So the whole book of Judges is set in this strange and violent period of history. We're introduced to an unnamed man who has a concubine. We don't really know what that means in this story, if she's his wife or if she's forced to be with him, but her father is described as his father-in-law, so it's at least some sort of committed relationship. Now she is unfaithful and returns home, so he travels to go find her and win her back. This part of the story is really strange. The father-in-law is super excited to see him and convinces him to stay and have a little dinner party. And every morning, when the man tries to leave, the father convinces him to stay. This happens again and again, back and forth, between the man trying to leave and the father convincing him to stay and party on. The man eventually takes his concubine and servants and they go on their way. After some discussion, they stop at a town called Gibeah along the way and are greeted by no one. Eventually, a mysterious man agrees to let them come and stay the night, warning them not to go out at night. And just like in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, an angry mob surrounds the old man's house. They demand to have their way with the man who has just entered the town. So what does the owner of the house do? He offers up his own daughter and the man's concubine. That's right, not only does he offer up his own daughter to the mob, he offers up another man's wife. So what does the husband do? He grabs his concubine and throws her to the angry mob. And the story says that they abused her all night long until dawn, when she staggered to the house and fell at the door. The man eventually comes out, and I kid you not, this is all he says when he sees her lying. Get up and we will go. It's only 2 words in Hebrew, a cold and uncaring response. When he doesn't get a response, he goes and cuts her into 12 pieces, which he sends to the 12 tribes of Israel. And do you want to know what might be one of the most messed up parts of this story, as if it could get any worse? In the original Hebrew language, it's ambiguous if she was even dead. She might have still been alive when the husband cut her up. He also lies about what happens. After the husband sent these severed body parts to the different parts of Israel, in the next chapter there's a big meeting of all the tribes about what happened. At this meeting, the unnamed man tells everyone what happened, but he changes the story. First he says the mob was trying to kill him instead of have sex with him. And look, maybe he knew what his fate would become after the mob was done. But he conveniently leaves out the part where he grabbed his concubine and threw her outside. Instead, he says they just took her. Well, this starts an all-out war. So one of the questions critics have is, does the Bible's silence on the man's actions mean that somehow it's acceptable or condoned? I think there's enough details to let you know that in this story, there are no heroes. The story highlights some of the worst parts of human nature. And that strange little episode at the start, what's all that about? Well, when the father-in-law begs the man to stay, it invites you to imagine how things could have been different if only he had stayed. From there, the mistreatment of vulnerable people highlights how bad the society of this story had become. In fact, the whole book of Judges demonstrates that the idea of every person doing what was right in their own eyes leads nowhere good. And this story is just one chilling example of that. There's also historical and political reasons behind a story like this. You see, at the beginning and end of this tale, there's a phrase that runs throughout the entire book of Judges. And Israel had no king. It's constantly repeated throughout the book. These harrowing tales were to remind their ancient readers that if they had a good leader, life would not be as it were in these stories, possibly serving as a justification for Israel's monarchy. But these stories still have wisdom that is timeless, even if sometimes it is hard to discern. You see, there's something unique in this particular story that's very rare in the Old Testament. The narrator appears to give a direct command to the reader. In a story, it's the narrator's job to tell you what's happening. But the Old Testament is famous for the narrator not giving the reader many details about people, motivation, and the meaning of particular stories. This lack of detail in Hebrew Bible stories leaves a lot for the imagination to fill in. It might seem frustrating because you just want to know why the characters did what they did. But this lack of detail actually allows a story to have multiple layers of meaning. But this story has a very unique exception to that rule. In the Old Testament, the narrator almost never talks directly to the reader. The last line in the original Hebrew reads in such a way that it could be directed at you, the reader, a command to consider and speak up. If it is a command to the reader, it would be one of the few times that occurs in the Old Testament. This story may invite you, the reader, to consider injustice and speak up against it. This video contains distressing.
All right, so
Jadi,
the man cuts his concubine into 12 pieces and sends them to all the tribes of Israel.
jadi pria ini memotong si gundik ini 12 bagian mutilasi dan dibagikan ke 12 suku Israel.
And all the tribes come together and say, wow, this evil, we've never seen this evil in all Israel before.
Jadi dia seluruh suku akhirnya mereka merawatkan dan mengatakan, wah, tidak pernah dilihat kejahatan yang seperti ini.
So they say, where did this happen? Where are these men? Let's go and kill them for what they've done.
Dan akhirnya mereka katakan, oh, ini di mana terjadi dan mana pria ini dan kita harus bunuh orang ini.
And he says it's in a town in the tribe of Benjamin.
Dan akhirnya dikatakan, oh, ini ada di kota di mana ada si suku Benjamin.
So Israel gathers several thousand men to go and fight these men.
Dan akhirnya mereka Israel mengumpulkan beberapa ribu pria untuk membunuh orang ini.
So they come to the tribe of Benjamin and say, hand over these wicked men.
Jadi mereka pergi ke daerah suku Benyamin dan berikan kami orang ini.
And the tribe of Benjamin says, no.
Dan suku Benyamin katakan tidak.
And so Israel says, either you hand over the men or we'll kill all of you.
Jadi akhirnya bangsa Israel katakan, kamu ngasih cowok itu atau malah kami bunuh kalian semua.
So we have the first civil war of Israel.
Jadi akhirnya terjadi di mana peperangan mereka sendiri yang pertama kali untuk Israel.
All of Israel gather and fight against Benjamin.
Jadi seluruh bangsa Israel yang lain itu melawan suku Benyamin.
They lose the first two battles, but the third battle, they almost destroy all of the people of the tribe of Benjamin.
Jadi waktu peperangan yang dua kali mereka kalah, tapi yang ketiga kali mereka hampir menghabiskan seluruh orang suku Benyamin.
In fact, the scriptures tell us that all the women of Benjamin were killed.
Jadi bahkan dikatakan di firman Tuhan bahwa seluruh wanita suku Benyamin terbunuh.
And in chapter 21 of Judges, Israel now thinks maybe they overreacted a little bit.
Dan akhirnya di pasal 21 terus Israel menyadari bahwa kayaknya kami bereaksi terlalu ya.
Because without wives, Benjamin will lose the land, their inheritance.
Karena tanpa istri orang Benyamin akan kehilangan keturunan dan untuk tanah mereka.
So they said, what are we going to do to give Benjamin, the people of Benjamin, wives?
Dan terus apa yang harus kita lakukan untuk orang-orang Benyamin bisa punya istri?
And then one of them said, hey, the city Jabesh Gilead, they didn't come and fight with us.
Dan lihat bahwa kota Yabes tidak benar-benar memerangi, ikut perang bersama kita.
When we called all of Israel together, that city did not come.
Waktu kita panggil seluruh bangsa Israel untuk berperang, kota ini tidak datang perang sama kita.
So they decided they would go to Jabesh Gilead and kill all of the men and take the virgins.
Dan akhirnya mereka sepakat untuk pergi ke kota Yabes Gilead Yabes untuk mereka bunuh seluruh prianya. Akhirnya mereka ambil seluruh wanitanya untuk kasih ke Benyamin.
And they come back with 400 virgins.
Dan mereka benar-benar ambil 400 perawan.
But they realized it's not even nearly enough.
Dan mereka sadari bahwa bahkan 400 itu tidak cukup.
Yeah, I know all this sounds crazy. They're doing what seems right to them.
Lihat bahwa ini terdengar sangat gila bagi kita, tapi Alkitab katakan mereka melakukan apa yang benar menurut mereka, apa yang benar menurut mata mereka.
But we see this go on in the Christian community all the time.
Dan bahkan kita terus melihat di dalam komunitas-komunitas Kristen ini terus terjadi,
Where the family will tell the wife, you need to leave your husband and come back home.
di mana bahkan keluarga dari seorang istri ngomongkan bahwa kamu harus tinggalin suamimu dan tinggalin rumah tanggamu.
They don't think they're doing anything bad.
Mereka nggak pikir mereka lakukan sesuatu yang buruk.
They're just doing what seems right to them.
Mereka hanya melakukan apa yang mereka pikir di matanya benar.
So this whole story is about what seemed right to them.
Jadi seluruh cerita ini bahwa tentang apa yang dilihat benar di mata mereka.
But they need a lot more than 400 women.
Tapi mereka butuh lebih banyak dari hanya sekedar 400 wanita.
Now the tabernacle is at Shiloh at this point.
Dan waktu masa ini kemah suci ada di Silo.
And one of their annual festivals could have been Passover, it could have been Tabernacles.
Dan salah satu perayaan tahunan mereka bisa Paskah, bisa perayaan kemah suci.
You see, all of Israel made a vow that they would not give any of their daughters to Benjamin.
Lihat bahwa akhirnya seluruh bangsa Israel membuat perjanjian untuk nggak akan kasih anak perempuannya ke suku Benyamin.
And they said, we can't break our vow.
Dan mereka katakan, kami nggak bisa melepaskan janji itu.
But we're going to bring all of our daughters to this festival.
Tapi kami akan bawa seluruh anak-anak perempuan kami ke festival ini.
And if you Benjamites run upon the festival and take our daughters, we won't chase you.
Tapi kalau ada Benyamin yang datang ke perayaan itu dan terus ngambil anak perempuan kami nggak akan ngejar kalian.
We won't be giving you our daughters, you'll be taking them.
Kami nggak akan ngasih, tapi kalian ngambil.
And this is what happens at Shiloh.
Dan inilah apa yang terjadi di Silo waktu itu.
The craziness that's going on in Israel is ridiculous.
Kegilaan yang terjadi di Israel itu luar biasa.
They keep doing what they think is right, and it makes the problem much worse.
Jadi mereka terus melakukan apa yang mereka pandang itu benar, akhirnya membuat masalah itu makin parah.
If they would just repent and turn to God.
Kalau mereka hanya bertobat saja dan berbalik ke Tuhan.
But they keep trying to fix the situation.
Tapi mereka mencoba untuk memperbaiki situasi yang ada.
And it makes it worse.
Dan itu membuat lebih parah.
And so, to finish the book of Judges, we're going to look at one verse.
Jadi untuk mengakhiri dari kitab Hakim-Hakim, kita akan lihat satu ayat ini.
And if you go back and read all through Judges again, it's because of this one verse.
Dan kalau kita membaca lagi seluruh Hakim-Hakim lagi, ini teman-teman bisa melihat karena ayat ini.
And it was in those days Israel had no king. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes.
Pada zaman itu tidak ada raja di antara orang Israel. Setiap orang berbuat apa yang benar menurut pandangannya sendiri.
And this left Israel in a very weak and bad condition.
Dan ini terus meninggalkan Israel di dalam kondisi yang lemah dan buruk.
It turned their hearts from the Lord.
Dan ini mereka berpaling hatinya dari Tuhan.
And all Israel thought that they were doing was the right thing.
Dan akhirnya bahwa bangsa Israel merasa bahwa apa yang mereka lakukan semuanya ini adalah hal yang benar untuk mereka lakukan.
This is why the word of God should be important to you and your family.
Itulah kenapa firman Tuhan haruslah penting bagi hidupmu dan keluargamu.
Because if you do what seems right to you, it will leave you like Israel.
Karena kamu melakukan apa yang menurutmu benar, kamu akan seperti Israel.
And so this finishes Judges.
Dan ini akan mengakhiri kita untuk kitab Hakim-Hakim.
We're going to go into 1 Samuel.
Kita akan ke 1 Samuel.
Which Israel is in the same bad condition in 1 Samuel.
Di mana Israel di dalam kondisi parah yang sama parahnya pada di 1 Samuel.
There's corruption at every level.
Ada kerusakan di semua level masyarakat.
All right, who wants to pray for us to close us out?
Siapa yang mau berdoa untuk nutup
Go ahead.
kita?
Mari kita berdoa. Bapa dalam surga, terima kasih Tuhan, terima kasih